Okay. Yeah, cool. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 37 of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. I'm your co-host, Mashal St. Patrick Hewitt. We're back quicker than you ever could imagine, and I'm with my partner in crime. Where you at?
Yeah, Santoki here. Mashal, you summed it up quicker than ever. We're back. We haven't had long to digest the historic win against Bangladesh, but we're entering another series, this time at home, against a side many would say match West Indies in terms of chaos and turbulence, both on and off the field. But we're glad to have a Sri Lankan cricket expert join us, Mash.
Indeed, indeed. I'm going to get this out. I'm going to get this out straight away, Santoki. This is the first series West Indies have played in a long time where I'm like, yeah, we're going to win this one. Everyone who's listening can come back to me at the end of the series and go, you told us this would be the one. But it's rare that West Indies can come across a team that wants to match, as you said, Santoki, match us for turmoil that we go through. And I think Sri Lanka are currently winning in the turmoil stakes. But our guest today is none other than ESPN's own Andrew Fidel Fernando. Andrew, how you doing?
Mashal, Santoki, so nice to be with you. Good point about the turmoil. I think you're spot on. I think Sri Lanka can definitely match West Indies for turmoil. The one thing I will say, though, is that turmoil doesn't necessarily correspond to performance when it comes to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka have had some of their best, greatest, most memorable wins ever in periods of like insane turmoil. It just means that they're just like a very swingy, kind of like insanely unpredictable team. So I don't think it matches, but they're coming off some like terrible test results against England and South Africa. You know, they've lost the last 4 tests in a row. So I think you probably could be reasonably confident, I think, in your pre-series prediction.
Well, you've already kind of given us the key things that everybody wants to talk about. I'm going to hand straight over to Santoki because Santoki, as Andrew said, the turmoil. Where do we even start with that, Santoki? Even when you and I decided about doing this this pod, so much has happened since we said we should do this pod that I don't know where we even begin. But I'm going to let you try and dissect it all, Santoki.
I'll try and put something together. So I guess as Andrew mentioned, you've had on the field 4 test matches, 4 pretty erratic performances, which has resulted in 4 losses. But if we look off the field, earlier this month, the Sri Lankan ministry appointed a 4-man technical advisory committee to kind of reform Sri Lankan cricket. And there's some pretty big names in there, 2 of which are Murali and Sangakkara. It's been reported their first line of action is to appoint Tom Moody as a director of cricket. So I just kind of want to get your thoughts on, firstly, where do you think Sri Lankan cricket has gone wrong so far in terms of having to appoint this board? And what do you think are the main objectives of the board in reforming Sri Lankan cricket?
I mean, look, we can, without getting too deep into it, I think I really like the names that are in there. I think Aravinda De Silva, Sangakkara, Muntamurudharan are people who know a lot about cricket and who can have a positive effect on Sri Lankan cricket. But I don't think that the problem with Sri Lankan cricket right now, and I think there are serious problems with Sri Lankan cricket right now, are kind of able to be solved by top-down approaches. And this appointment of a cricket committee is kind of a top-down approach where they look at, you know, the national team first and then look below that afterwards. What needs to happen in Sri Lankan cricket is kind of grassroots, bottom-up approach where our domestic cricket, I think, you know, needs a huge fix. I won't go too much into that, but apart from saying that domestic cricket in Sri Lanka is in a really bad way at the moment, and that is part of the reason for kind of the swingy, erratic results that we've talked about already. Because once people come into the team, yes, there are people with, you know, insane talent, but that talent only kind of shines through sporadically and very intermittently. So when it does shine, when they do well, they do incredibly well. When they do badly, they do really, really badly. And I think West Indies have kind of been through a similar journey in some ways of having these insanely kind of inspiring results and also these haunting kind of lows. And I think the point that Mashal made earlier on is very good, is that they're kind of very, very similar teams in so many ways, and the administration of both cricket boards has a lot to do with that.
And I guess we don't want to go too much in detail on domestic cricket because I'm sure there's a lot you can talk about that. But interestingly enough, we have mentioned Sri Lankan domestic cricket before on our pod. We've had Kieran Powell come on for an interview, and he's actually played in a domestic circuit for Tamil Union. And he actually said, in his opinion, Sri Lankan domestic cricket was more organised and stronger than West Indian regional cricket. So if we can just touch upon domestic cricket, what are kind of the main issues? Is it a case of there being too many teams, not enough quality? Kind of where do you see the problems relaying in domestic cricket at the moment?
I think you're exactly right. I think in terms of organization, these competitions have been going on for such a long time that they do know how to organize. They know how to host a domestic tournament. But the problem you mentioned, too many teams, not enough quality, is basically you've hit the nail on the head there, because in Sri Lanka we've got right now we've got 24 first-class teams. Which means that every first class round there are 260 odd domestic cricketers turning out, right? What Sri Lanka really needs is like a very, very small domestic tournament where you have maybe 7, maybe 8 teams maximum, where you have the 80 cricketers in the country playing each other on a regular basis and honing their skills against each other. And that is, I think, by far the biggest failing. I think many former players have said that, from Sangakkara to Mahela Jayawardene to Murali, to a lot of former players have made that point. But the problem is with the way that Sri Lankan cricket is administered and organized, and the way that the Sri Lankan board comes together, which is kind of like there are too many votes in the system. So that's really the nub of the issue, and I think you really hit the nail on the head. A lot of Sri Lankan players come into the national team and realize they have to learn how to play international cricket at the international level, and so that's where you have issues, where you've got players who are really talented, who look really good at domestic level, coming into the national team and having to learn a brand new craft all over again right at the top level. And that's like it's clearly not an ideal situation. You want players who are coming into the national team to be really well honed and to be aware of what they can expect, and for that gap to be as small as possible, that gap between domestic and international cricket to be as small as possible. Right now it's a chasm. Right now it's a long bridge that they have to cross. And I think that's where Sri Lankan cricket has really kind of struggled in the last few years.
And I guess another similarity with West Indian cricket is this kind of look at a golden generation. Like Surya, Murali, Sangakkara kind of come through. And one question we've had from a lot of followers on social media has been, did this golden generation emerge in spite of the system, or was the system improved in their day?
I think there's a little bit of both. I think the system was better in their day, in that there were fewer first-class teams. There was more quality. There were more quality cricketers playing each other during that time, and I think that's what kind of like Mahela Jayawardene and Kumar Sangakkara in particular have been talking about in the last few years. Is that actually when they were coming up, there was some really strong domestic cricket, whereas now the quality of the domestic cricket has decreased. So that's one point. But then you also had kind of like once in a lifetime cricketers like Murali, right? Like, so Murali is someone I don't think Sri Lanka will ever get again, in terms of, I mean, he's just an all-time great, ridiculous player. So you won't get someone like him again. And we were lucky to have someone like Jayasuriya, or someone like Aravinda De Silva, someone like, and then Kumar Sangakkara, Mahela Jayawardene were kind of more products of the system. But the Muralis, the Sanats, the Aravindas were kind of like more kind of freakish talents that came through that happened to be at the right time. So maybe Sri Lanka won't have such a golden age. It's not like, I think it's a similar thing with the West Indies, where, you know, you probably can't hope for another 80s again. And Sri Lanka probably can't hope for another 96 again. But what they can hope for is much more consistency than we've seen in the last few years. And and you get that by improving your systems, improving your domestic cricket, putting a plan together to make sure that quality cricketers come through, which is absolutely not happening now. You don't need to have that kind of golden era, but you can at least be a team like Australia, which occasionally has golden eras where these kind of like incredible players come together and play and kind of win a lot of matches. But when they fall, they don't really fall too far, because what is underneath, what is driving their cricket is really really solid. So they never, when Australian cricket has dips, those dips aren't very deep. They're not, they bounce back really quickly from bad performances. So I think that's the thing that systems and domestic cricket can improve.
And I guess the last point on kind of the legends that you mentioned, Chaminda Vaas, obviously appointed as a bowling coach for the tour, resigned 72 hours later. What's kind of your take on it? Can you give insight into kind of what happened there?
I mean, yes, I think I kind of have a lot of sympathy for Chaminda Vaas. So he was appointed. He's been a coach in the SLC system for a long time now. He's been working for SLC with the under-19 team, with the emerging squads, with the A team for a long time, with the High Performance Center. So he's been a coach that's been in the system for a while. And David Saker quit very close to the West Indies tour, and they needed to appoint someone, and Chaminda Vaas was kind of the name that they went for. The thing, though, is that Sri Lanka cricket has a tendency to pay and treat its foreign coaches a lot better than its local coaches. And I think Chaminda Vaas picked up on that and was like, why am I being paid so much less than David Saker for the same job? And I think that's a very fair question to ask in my view. And Sri Lanka cricket has a history of managing its relationships with its local coaches very poorly. Chandika Hathursinghe, who was coach of Sri Lankan cricket, who was head coach of the national team a couple of years ago, is a prime example. Chaminda Vaas is, more recently is another one. So my sympathies very much are with Vaas, because if you're going to be hired for a particular position, you expect to be paid and remunerated the same as anyone else who would do that job. And Sri Lankan cricket does not have a history of paying Sri Lankan coaches. And I would kind of draw a parallel with, say, Indian cricket, which has kind of like invested in local coaches and local talent, and come to a place that Sri Lanka, is desperate to reach in terms of like the consistency that they have in their teams, the depth that they have. Sri Lanka would love to be in a place that India is, and India has done that by just choosing to invest in Indian talent, both on a coaching front and on a playing front. And that is something I think Sri Lanka could definitely learn from. And certainly right now, those lessons have not been learnt, and Chaminda Vaas has been a victim of kind of let's say, an older way of doing things, without getting too critical, because I could get very critical.
we want all the smoke on here. But that's interesting, and actually that point you've made about I guess whether it's preferring foreign coaches or not. I think when President Skerritt took over Cricket West Indies in 2019, he made a point of saying that if West Indies are to improve, it's not that we're not saying no to foreign appointees, but we are saying that they must have significantly better skills than what we currently have in the Caribbean. And if they are to come over, it's also with a remit to train people up so that they can so that we can therefore go local, so to speak, in the future. So it's interesting to hear that, because that kind of similar tale about Vaas feeling like he's not being paid at the same rate. There's certainly a lot of West Indian coaching talent that would say that they've had similar troubles in the past. But one thing we wanted to get on, I mean, looking ahead to the tour itself.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
So it's really that's a really interesting point, and that's fantastic that that Skerritt has said that. The one additional thing you have to consider in Sri Lanka is that there's a language issue as well, right? Like a lot of the players in the Sri Lankan team speak Sinhala, or one or two might speak Tamil, not in this present team, but in past teams. So it is a huge advantage to have a head coach that kind of connects with these players on in their language that they speak, and to prefer foreign coaches in that kind of situation, I think is like verging on unforgivable, because when you have this amazing, you've got people like Mahela Jayawardene who've gone to the IPL, won 3 IPL tournaments, right? With Mumbai Indians, have this incredible wealth of experience, both as players and as coaches, and you're kind of cutting them out of a coaching situation at home when they can connect with your players in their language, and you're not allowing them to do so. I mean, this to me is incredibly short-sighted, and kind of like speaks to the dysfunction in Sri Lankan cricket, where you have this kind of history of having foreign coaches come over, and we've had great West Indian coaches come over. Garfield Sobers was the Sri Lankan coach during kind of 82, 83. But at the same time, you want coaches who really understand where your players are from, and can speak to them on the level that they can understand and feel understood, and to reject that in favor of foreign coaches, and to not pay your local coaches the right amount. I think there are many issues with Sri Lankan cricket that I could talk about, but this is genuinely one of them that I feel very strongly about.
So wait a minute, I'm going to put you on the spot then.
Sure.
So what we said about Mickey Arthur then?
I think Mickey Arthur is a fantastic coach, and he's got such a broad kind of like scope of experience coaching Australia, coaching South Africa, coaching Pakistan, but the whole Mickey Arthur is not a bad choice for Sri Lankan cricket right now. I don't think that he is, but the way that local coaches are spoken about, this is not. My point is not about like particular appointments, about specific coaches that are in the system right now. It's about systemic change, right? So it's about like bringing. Why is no one in that Sri Lankan dressing room that's kind of like in a high place coaching capacity? Why are none of them Sri Lankans? Yeah. Why? That is my point. Is that okay? You can have a Mickey Arthur, but why can you not also have a Chaminda Vaas who can coach bowlers, who can speak to bowlers, who can kind of like who can connect with them in their language, who understands where they're from, and all of that is also important. Speaking, these are professional cricketers, but they also have particular contexts that they come from and particular ways that they can be motivated in. Right, like they're not necessarily always going to respond to a foreign coach. Mickey Arthur can be like a great director of cricket who kind of oversees the whole thing, has a detached perspective. But I think that genuinely there needs to be like local people in those positions who can carry out the vision of someone who is from a kind of looking at things from a detached perspective and giving feedback to them, right? Like players aren't necessarily going to be fully honest with any coach, and this is not any kind of fault of Mickey Arthur. Mickey Arthur, by the way, has spent the entirety of the pandemic in Sri Lanka. So like mad props to him for staying in the country, for trying to like kind of be as close to his players as possible. I want to make that point about Mickey, but it's what I'm talking about is systemic change, right? So Mickey Arthur can come up with these great plans and fantastic kind of vision for Sri Lankan cricket, but there need to be people who can communicate that to the players in language they can understand, in ways they can understand, in ways that they are motivated to do those things. And I think long term, the strategy has to be to put as many local coaches in those positions, because more and more we're getting non-English speaking players coming into the national team. And that's absolutely right, because the majority of Sri Lanka is non-English speaking. And so we want to democratize the sport in this country as much as possible. And so if that's the case, then we need to have as many local coaches as possible in those positions, carrying out this vision.
Yeah, totally hear that. Totally hear. And I think for many in the Caribbean, that would resonate more so for us, not from a language perspective, but from a cultural perspective. I think that would resonate in the Caribbean. So if we look ahead to, obviously the white ball series is first, the T20s and the ODIs. And it's a bit of a weird one for Sri Lanka, in so much as they've not played any white ball cricket at all since we last toured Sri Lanka. So we went to Sri Lanka just before the pandemic. And Sri Lanka won the ODIs 3-0. But it was actually a close run thing. It was a lot closer than the 3-0 suggested. I think they won one game by 1 wicket, the second game by 6 runs when Fabian Allen tried to steal the match at the end. And then the T20s, we had Andre Russell and he did his thing. And we took the T20 series. But Sri Lanka only played, since returning to international cricket, they've only played the tests. We'll get onto that in a bit. But the white ball squads have been released in the last few days, and it's not as much as I'm saying, oh yeah, the West Indies are going to win this series. let me now take it back, because it's not like there aren't household and when I say household names, I mean in the modern day context of who Sri Lanka are. It's not like they don't have a great selection of talent within that squad. And I feel like, because of what's like sports fandom, a lot of it now goes to recency bias. So the recent stuff is they were shambolic against South Africa, shambolic against England. So everyone now assumes that Sri Lanka are useless. But there are some seriously talented players in that white ball squad. I think a lot, when we were in Sri Lanka last time, the person I noticed was it Hasaranga? Is that the player I'm thinking of? So what's your take on the white ball squad that's been announced? And like I say, such a long hiatus, essentially a year since they last played. What are you expecting to take from this series?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot more hope in the white ball series. I mean, Hasaranga, the name you mentioned, leg spinner with a fantastic googly, by the way. Watch out for that. He gets a lot of his wickets with the one that turns the other way. So he's had a fantastic year in white ball cricket. Played the Lanka Premier League. Was the player of the series in that, very, very deservedly, and also can bat a bit. I think he won one of those games, one of those ODI games you're mentioning. He won with the bat rather than with the ball, so he's a threat with the bat as well. I think the ODI team, it comes down a little bit to leadership for me, because the ODI team is led by Dimuth Karunaratne, who I think is a fantastic leader. And although he's not a great one-day player himself, is kind of able to is a good player manager. He's able to like manage the rest of the team. Like I've never, like Sri Lankan cricket is kind of like, I don't know what West Indies cricket is like, and I suspect it's similar, where it's kind of like a very disunited kind of system at the best of times. Players are kind of always kind of there are a lot of kind of factions and conflicting interests, whereas Dimuth Karunaratne is someone who I've never heard anybody say a bad word about, right? Because he just gets on with everybody. And so there's that aspect of his leadership in that ODI team, I think, which is helping pull people a little bit together, which is helping everybody kind of perform to near their best, even if Dimuth himself is not necessarily your kind of textbook ODI player in the modern era. And I think there are definite kind of chinks in his game in terms of like scoring rates. He's never really, been a massive limited overs player, but he at the moment is pulling things together enough in that ODI team to make it competitive. In the T20s, I think West Indies for sure have an edge because it's had kind of these kind of crazy crises of leadership. Lasith Malinga wasn't as good a leader, and now that Malinga's out, he's not essentially. He hasn't announced his retirement yet, but I suspect that he may have played either his last game or he may get like one farewell game in Sri Lanka. But I'm not sure we'll see much more of him in international cricket. The new leader that's been assigned, Dasan Shanaka, is a good captain. We've seen him captain Sri Lanka before, and we've seen him captain LPL teams before. But in this series, because of like crazy COVID things, he's not necessarily going to be there for the first or second match. So he might not be captain, and I'm not sure who their backup is. It might be Thisara Perera, it might be Angelo Matthews, or it could be Dinesh Chandimal also. So they've got a few captaincy kind of stand-in options. So that leadership is much more kind of up in the air. And Sri Lanka have been, despite having been kind of the last T20 champions are West Indies. The previous one is Sri Lanka.
Yep.
Despite having been the best T20 team between 2012 and 2014, Sri Lanka's T20 decline has been like massively dramatic. So they're not a good T20 team at the moment. And unless like something crazy happens, I'm not expecting miracles in this West Indies series. ODIs, I think they have a better chance.
I think, as you mentioned, I was going to say, as you mentioned, the decline in the T20 format, I think that's kind of indicative in the fact this is the first IPL season since its inception where there's not been one Sri Lankan player to feature. I guess it'd be good to get your thoughts on what you thought of the Lanka Premier League. Kind of, is that a good platform in terms of reinvigorating T20 cricket in Sri Lanka?
I do think that it is. I think the Lanka Premier League was actually, it seemed to me like it was pretty competitive competition. The fielding was terrible for most of it, but that's kind of it was kind of expected in a series where so many of these players had not had much time to prepare. But then towards the end of it, I think we definitely did see some kind of quality performances come through, and it was. I think what is important with the Lanka Premier League is that it was a 3-week competition, and you need to build on that. Like, it was good. It was a 3-week competition. But there are limited gains that you can have from a 3-week competition. Yes, you identified some talent. Yes, you were able to kind of test some players against each other and play some high quality cricket and get some idea of how these players would perform in high stress situations. But it needs to happen year on year. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they do this year. I think there's a tournament scheduled for August, and we'll see how they go, how much foreign talent they're able to kind of attract for that tournament, and how it happens. The bigger issue, I think, is that in the 3-4 years before this Lanka Premier League in November, there was virtually nothing, right? There was maybe at best like a 1-week T20 tournament that, they kind of like played between 40 players, and it was completely meaningless. There was no honing of anyone's talent. There was no kind of like getting better and working out who the best players in Sri Lanka were. It was kind of complete guesswork. So that, I think, is what has led to, again, it's the kind of domestic structure that we have that's led to this decline. Where you don't have these like incredibly like skillful and incredibly intelligent players like Kumar Sangakkara, Mahela Jayawardene running the show. You don't have someone like a Lasith Malinga who's like this kind of T20 genius who's in the side. And if you don't have those players marshalling everybody else, then you're left with very little. And I think that's what we found in the last couple of years. Malinga has had his own kind of like personal decline, partly because of age, partly because of fitness in his T20 game. And because of that, we haven't seen Sri Lanka really kind of fire on the T20 front, despite the fact, I mean, they were the number one team, the number one ranked team between 2012 and 2014. And they've won they've been in, I think, three World T20 finals, 2009, 2012 against West Indies in Sri Lanka, and 2014 when they won the tournament. Despite that history, they've become almost, they have to qualify for the next World T20 World Cup. So that decline, I think, is also down to the domestic things that have been happening.
I mean, the series, normally a T20 bilateral series is a waste of time. I mean, it's great to watch some cricket and see some sixes, but normally I'd say, oh, whoever wins, wins. But actually, given we have a World Cup at the end of this year, Santoki, assuming that Sri Lanka have no chance of winning it, for the West Indies at least, we are, well, whether people are considering us or not, you and I, Santoki, are considering West Indies. So, but this is actually important fine-tuning for the West Indies this series, because for a start, we know that virtually everyone who would want to play is going to be in this series. So I'm talking about your Chris Gales, your DJ Bravos, your Andre Russell, your Pollard. Literally, West Indies will have their full team there. What are your takes on, yes, the squad's not announced, Santoki, what's your take on where we're at?
Yeah, I mean, we're always saying like the West Indies are essentially like the Avengers. They come together at the World Cup after doing their own sort of solo missions. I mean, even in Lankan Premier League, we had Andre Russell in there, Johnson Charles. Anywhere there's a franchise tournament, you'll find West Indian players. And that sort of bank of experience means when it does come for a World Cup, we'll have the likes of Pollard, Pooran, DJ Bravo, who know India like the back of their hand at this point. So you'd fancy West Indies to kind of take that World Cup. But I guess, as you were saying, Mash, for this series, we've seen the regional Super 50 take place in Antigua, and obviously all the Sri Lanka matches will take place on the same pitch. We've seen the pitch deteriorate at Coolidge and the Sir Viv ground. Do you think that gives an advantage to Sri Lanka, knowing that spin's going to be so effective?
If Sri Lanka had a team that was T20s, if Sri Lanka had a team where I was looking at the last 6 months and loads of Sri Lankans had been playing in loads of different tournaments everywhere, then maybe I'd be willing to give Sri Lanka a chance here. And maybe I'm going to be proved wrong, but I don't know. It's like I say, this is rare. Don't think, Andrew, like this is West Indian confidence. This is rare that I come with this level of confidence.
No, I fully if there's a team you can be confident about against, look, this is the one. Like, go for it. There is no bad feeling on this side, because I mean, Sri Lanka has not played limited overs cricket for a while, and when they last played, yes, they won that one-day series at home, but like there's a lot you can poke holes in. So no, I mean, like I don't think your confidence is in any way misplaced. And I think like Santoki made a great point about the West Indies team coming together, because I think it's incredible that West Indies have these players who are in demand in every single T20 franchise tournament in the world, and they play against every single player that they're going to come against in a World T20 tournament, in a T20 World Cup, as we're now calling it, in that tournament, because like what Sri Lanka wouldn't give to have that kind of experience, to have players who know how other players play, to have batsmen who have played. Okay, yes, the Sri Lankan player who bowled a couple of good spells and then suddenly has come on in the last couple of years or the last few months and is now in this match playing against us. To have a Johnson Charles to explain to other players in the team what Wanindu Hasaranga does, right? That I think is so valuable in the T20 format, especially where battles are won on these little fronts. And I think West Indies are like so much stronger as a T20 team for having this wealth of T20 experience to call upon.
And like, well, you know where I stand, but whereas, I mean, well, I was about to say, whereas with the white ball, I was about to say, whereas with the white ball, I'm confident, the tests I'm not. But actually, so West Indies have just come off a miraculous test series win in Bangladesh. No one gave that what was heralded as a second string side. No one gave them a chance, but they went to Bangladesh, who, in fairness, were returning to cricket for the first time in a year or so, and we pulled off a 2-0 series victory. Again, at the time of recording, the squad is yet to be announced, the test squad, but there's going to be, whatever is announced, there's going to be huge discussion in the Caribbean over who shouldn't have made it, who should have kept their place because of what happened in Bangladesh, where certain players are once they've been dropped. Now, we've got that as our debate in the Caribbean. But with Sri Lanka, since their return to cricket, and it's so weird because against South Africa, they started all right. I think they were okay for a bit. And then literally, is it harsh to say, Andrew, that it's been downhill since the whatever the first, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what the collapse was in South Africa. And in fairness, they had no injuries as well. Now, actually, I wasn't even going to, let me start again. Sorry, Andrew. The injuries that happened in South Africa, was that down to lack of cricket, lack of preparation, players not taking personal responsibility for their fitness? Because how many was it in the end? Was it like 3 players were out of the first test within 2 days or something ridiculous like that? And literally, and I don't know if it's too harsh to say this, it's almost been like a catalogue of errors since that, all the way through into the England series. Or is that too hard? Is that too simplistic and too harsh?
You maybe a touch too harsh, but not too far. But not too far. Like maybe just like a tiny bit over the. So what I would say is, I think you're absolutely right. In a strange way, they acquitted themselves better in South Africa in a 2-0 series loss. They played better. They played like more better cricket in South Africa than they played in Sri Lanka against England in another 2-0 series loss. Partly that was because I think in South Africa they were led better. Again, I will bring Dimuth Karunaratne up. Dimuth was leading them in South Africa. They had a lot of injuries. So Saranga Lakmal, the top choice test seamer, was out of the whole South Africa series. Lahiru Kumara, who is again out of this series because of COVID, because he tested positive for COVID. Is out of the series. It would have been fantastic to see him play again. He did fantastically well on that last West Indies tour, and would have kind of like relished bowling with the Duke's ball, I'm sure. And then there were other fast bowlers who were injured on the South Africa tour, and also Dhananjay De Silva, who's a fantastic kind of middle order batsman, who was also injured, who has been unavailable since then. And it's been incredibly unfortunate because all of these are like kind of invaluable players to Sri Lanka's test team. And they do a lot in terms of bringing a sense of like seriousness and bringing a sense of like professionalism in, because like, Saranga Lakmal, Dimuth Karunaratne, Dhananjay De Silva, all very, very serious players who bring kind of like a solidity to the team that maybe they lacked in that England series. When they were led by Chandimal. I mean, Chandimal's a very good player, but I think we know that he's not necessarily like a great leader or a great captain. So it'll be interesting to see. Dimuth Karunaratne, the regular test captain, is back for this series. And we don't know the test squad yet, but I suspect that he won't have all his best quicks. I don't think Lahiru Kumara will be able to join because of his having tested positive for COVID. But Saranga Lakmal will be there as his kind of like his leading fast bowler, and hopefully some others will be there as well. But I think it's such a strange thing though. Like cricket in the time of COVID is so weird. Because there are so many unknowns and so many players who are being ruled out for this one reason, because quarantines are messed up. And there's also these visa issues, right? Like I mentioned that Dustin Shanaka might not be able to join. If he had had a UK visa or an Australian visa or a first world visa, let's say, he would have been with the team in time for the first match. But he has a Sri Lankan passport, so he can't be. And so there are also these things to consider, that like cricket in the time of this pandemic is unfair to teams that does not have these like first world passports.
When
and
you say
Sri Lanka will struggle as a result of that. Yeah.
When you're saying he had the Sri Lanka passport, what, as opposed to any of the other players?
Yeah. So the reason why Dustin Shanaka can't come to the West Indies on time is because he didn't have. They're transiting through the US.
Oh, sorry,
so
right.
He needs to have a US transit visa. So he has to fly from Sri Lanka probably to either the Middle East or the UK. I don't know what the flight schedule is, and then flies to probably New York, and then flies to Antigua. Right? The point that the visa he's missing is not the Antiguan one. It's the US one. He doesn't have the US visa because of various passport issues. Again, I'm not going to go into it now. But that's the reason. And if he had been an England player, that would have been a non-issue.
Right.
If he had been an Australian player, it would have been a non-issue. But because he's a Sri Lankan player, he needs to have that in place. And so these are the things I think that during a pandemic you have to be wary of, that people from the global south are disadvantaged in all kinds of ways. And this is not necessarily a major way in which they're disadvantaged. There are lots of people who have it worse, but this does also play a role. And I think we have to be mindful of that.
You talked about serious characters in the Sri Lankan team. One guy who's kind of got cult status on social media for kind of his attempts at sledging and his kind of busyness is Dick Weller. Kind of, what do you make of him and his kind of contributions to the side?
Yeah, I mean, I love watching Dick Weller as a player. I hate watching him in a way because he's so disappointing. But then in terms of like his output as a batsman and as a keeper, like, but I also just love him as a character in cricket, right? Like, he's hilarious. He's got this like incredibly infectious personality, and he's funny, but also I just wish he was like a more consistent and more reliable cricketer from a Sri Lankan perspective. And it's I think there's like very few better sledgers in the game today, like more entertaining people to watch in cricket. He's behind the stumps, he talks a lot, but it's not like you know disrespectful, like coming at players. He just kind of like he just makes comments that are funny. And my kind of like one of my biggest wishes for Sri Lanka is that Dick Weller becomes a consistent player, because I love watching him as a character in cricket, as someone who brings color to our sport. And I think like if you listen to his kind of stump mic discussions with England players or South African players or whoever, you would come to that conclusion. But he's kind of a crazy guy. Like he takes insane risks as a batsman. As a white ball player, you'll see him kind of like try and play these scoops over his shoulder in the first over an innings. And sometimes they pay off as well. But you just want to kind of bring that like maverick kind of nature into a more productive kind of like structure, which I think is kind of the whole thing that I've been talking about in this whole podcast it's kind of like an analogy for all of Sri Lanka cricket, where you have this kind of maverick, crazy, kind of talented kind of players, but you want to bring them into a structure where they can score runs, match after match after match, and be relied upon. And that's kind of what I hope for from Dick Weller. who I do love watching him play.
Santoki, before we head to the loads, the mailbag was huge. Just one quick question from me, though, Andrew, which is, do you think Sri Lanka even wanted to go on this tour? Now, hear me out before I leave it there, because there were points before, and I know behind the scenes, Johnny Grave and Cole at Cricket West Indies were working 24/7 effectively with Sri Lanka Cricket Board to make sure this tour went ahead. West Indies had literally just signed a broadcast deal with BT, and Santoki and I were like, what are we going to have no cricket when we've just had a broadcast deal signed with people advertising West Indies versus Sri Lanka? But there were a few things that were coming out of the Sri Lanka press, and maybe they had it wrong, but I'm just saying what I was reading, which seemed to suggest that at least some elements within the board would have preferred if this tour didn't go ahead, and maybe if they could just have some time to get ready for the Bangladesh tour instead, or the Bangladesh series instead. Or do you think that's wide of the mark and it was always going to happen?
No, I think every board is going through a difficult kind of, like, every board apart from kind of the big three are going through challenging financial times right now. And Sri Lanka cricket doesn't make money off a Bangladesh series necessarily, so they aren't anyway. It's like having a Bangladesh tour come to Sri Lanka isn't like a big financial boon for them. I think probably the West Indies tour, it was probably a case of kind of discussing when it would happen and when it could happen, rather than figuring out, rather than it, I don't think that Sri Lanka cricket was ever that unkeen on it happening. They weren't like reluctant for it to happen. The players certainly would have wanted it to happen. They are very keen to play as much cricket as they can at the moment. I don't think there are certain tours that are important to Sri Lanka cricket. That's like India, England, West Indies, and Pakistan, and those are really the only inbound tours that Sri Lanka cares about. And beyond that, they're okay. Like they're happy, and they would probably want to keep West Indies cricket sweet. So unless that, I don't think that there was a huge reluctance, and I think that I haven't heard that any I haven't heard of any major reluctance for this tour to happen. I think everyone's pretty happy that the team is playing.
Cool. Santoki, you want to open up the mailbag?
Yeah, let's go for it. So we got the first one from Chatil. I guess you'd know more about this one. He kind of asks, referring to Gunnar Talika's comments after passing the fitness test, do you oppose his attitude towards the public, or does that motivate him to do better?
Okay, so I mean, I'll catch everyone up on this. Basically, what had happened was that there's this fitness test, I think, that Mickey Arthur and the coaching staff have introduced, which is to have Sri Lanka players run, I think, 2 kilometers within 8.5 minutes, and that's kind of the fitness test that you have to pass to be able to, take part in the tour. And Gunnar Talika failed the first round of this, but then kind of passed the second round. I think he made it in 8 minutes 23 in the second round, and was able to be available for selection. And then he kind of put up a joking kind of post on Twitter and Instagram saying, I like to do all things twice. And people and players and fans kind of like didn't like that. And I can understand both sides. Is that Gunnar Talika is being a little bit kind of cheeky. He's been someone who hasn't necessarily in the past done all that he can to be kind of like well behaved for Sri Lankan cricket. He's had some behavioral kind of issues in the past, but that's also kind of his personality, being a kind of a little bit out of the box. I don't think that fans are unreasonable in expecting better from him. But I'm not like that perturbed by him. I think it's kind of like a non-issue for me. Yes, Gunnar Talika was kind of a little bit cheeky, but it's it's not that big a deal. I think it's, you know, Sri Lankan cricket has much bigger fish to fry than this one.
Yeah. And I guess the next question is from a fellow Fernando, so Shavin Fernando. He asks, is there any way that Test cricket could be more lucrative for Sri Lankan players?
There is. I think there definitely could be, is if Sri Lankan cricket kind of like marketed Test cricket locally. Right now, one-day cricket and T20 cricket are very well followed. Test cricket is also well followed among kind of a certain group of people, but it's not well marketed. Sri Lankan cricket doesn't really have like a vision for growing Test cricket in the country. And it's kind of up to the players to decide that Test cricket is the biggest thing. I think that is one of the big changes that I would like to see happen, is that Test cricket is seen as kind of like an elite arena, or like as the purest or most interesting form of cricket, because there's a lot of kind of Test cricket tradition in the country as well, and a lot of multi-day cricket tradition in the country that isn't being tapped, that isn't being encouraged. And yeah, for sure, I think Sri Lankan cricket could do better on that front.
Mash, should we go to the wrap-up questions, our big questions?
Yeah. Okay. So everyone has to answer these, and you are no different. Once you come on the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, you have to answer these questions. So question number one. What is your okay, yeah, let me rephrase it. What has been your favorite cricket ground? Technically, the answer has to be a Caribbean cricket ground, but are you well versed in Caribbean cricket grounds?
I know about them, but I desperately want to do a tour of the Caribbean, and I never have. So I know about the Rec. I've read a lot about the Rec. I've read a lot about like the Trinidadian grounds, but I just would love to be there to experience it all. And I strongly suspect that some of them have a lot in common with Sri Lankan grounds also. There seems to be, from what I've read, there seems to be like a lot of similarities. The Rec is somewhere where I would have loved to watch a cricket ground, cricket match. Look, like, I mean, so many great writers have written about it. But anyway, sorry, what was the question? I've derailed your question.
I was letting you drift away to Nights at the Rec in your head, so I'm going to rejig the question. What has been your favorite ground in the world? So it doesn't have to be Caribbean now. What has been your favorite ground in the world to watch cricket at, and why?
Look, I'm going to be very parochial here and say Galle. Galle is just a stunning venue. Like, it is. So again, this is why I think like Sri Lankan venues have a lot in common with Caribbean venues. Galle is surrounded by ocean on two sides, right? There's a huge fort in the background, kind of built by the Portuguese and the Dutch. We won't go into that colonial history, which I'll be very negative about, but it's a very, very stunning kind of like backdrop to cricket. And also the pitch is always spinner friendly, which I love. And Murali and Rangan Herath have loved over the years, and always produces a result. As a cricket journalist, often produces a 3-day or 4-day result, so you get an extra day off, right? So like all these things to love about it. And there are so many cool things to do in your off time. You can go scuba diving, you can go surfing. There are fantastic like restaurants in the vicinity. It is just a stunning location for cricket. So that I would say, like, of the grounds I've been to, and I've been to like Cape Town, I've been to all the beautiful grounds in New Zealand, in England and Australia, Galle is the one that stands out for me. That said, Dharamshala is also an awesome, like, amazing backdrop for cricket. The Himalayas in the background. I mean, like, it's hard to match that for a backdrop. So I think Dharamshala and Galle would probably be my two favorites.
Well, we'll allow you that one bit of Sri Lankan bias. With the second question, who has been, so I'm going to tweak this one as well, although technically you're supposed to give a Caribbean as an answer. Who has been your favorite non-Sri Lankan batsman to watch? Or bowler, sorry, cricketer. So let me phrase that, sorry. Who's been your favorite non-Sri Lankan cricketer to watch?
Okay, so do you want me to give the Caribbean answer first?
Give us a Caribbean answer and then whatever your actual real answer is.
Yeah, I mean, look, like Brian Lara, I mean, like, who could not enjoy watching Brian Lara play? Like, there's got to be something wrong with you to not enjoy watching this man bat. And then also Courtney Walsh over Curtly Ambrose. Crazily, I loved watching Courtney Walsh bowl. In a weird way, I just loved kind of like the discipline that he brought to his bowling, as the kind of like the kind of amalgam between discipline and fire that he brought to his bowling. Whereas Ambrose more was just about like intimidation, and like Ambrose was always scarier, but Walsh just seemed like a more kind of like just someone who had honed his craft a bit more. And I'm saying that that's probably unfair to Ambrose, who also honed his craft, who's also a very intelligent and very canny bowler. But Walsh, just on first glance, you know, watching in the 90s as a younger cricket watcher, let's say, I just loved watching Walsh bowl. Non-Sri Lankan player, look, Dale Steyn, like what a bowler. Just loved the intensity that he brought to his game. Loved the skills that he brought to his game, the reverse swing, the conventional swing, and was just such a chill character off the field. I think that's really what clinched it for me. Just like surfs, fishes, skateboards, just like, it's just someone you think you would just like to have a drink with. You would love to like hang out with, I think. And then on the field was just like an absolute monster. So yeah, I think them other players. Look, there are too many, man. Like Anil Kumble is another one. Like again, like leg spin, that leg spin was what I used to do when I used to play cricket. But Anil Kumble bowled such different leg spin from what I bowled, and he was so good at it, and just seems like such a fantastic kind of like a learner and an exponent of leg spin, doing leg spin in a way that no one else did it. And who else? Like Mike Hussey, another great player who kind of took elements of all three formats and melded them into his game, and his test match game became better because he was a good T20 batsman. Like that is something I like massively appreciated and loved. Kagiso Rabada, another one that I absolutely love watching play right now. Mackay Antini, like there's too many, but like from the West Indies, Lara and Walsh were two. Jason Holder right now is one that I really, really enjoy watching. Look, I'm just a cricket fan. Like, what can I say? I'm just like, I love watching all these players play. Holder for me right now is a more watchable all-rounder than anybody else, and I include Ben Stokes in that. Holder for me right now is the best, is the most watchable all-rounder in the world. So I'll leave you with that, just because it's the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. I'll leave you with that one.
Well, we asked you for one, and you gave us about 17.
I'm sorry. I you know, like, who can stop themselves? You know, it's a cricket podcast, and I love this whole thing. So
it's all good. Santoki, any last words from you?
No, it's been a pleasure and really informative to kind of get an insight into Sri Lankan cricket before we destroy them in this upcoming series.
Actually, that's a good point, Santoki. So let's all put our flags on the mast here. I'll go first with all three elements of the tour. So ODIs, T20s, there's 3 ODIs, 3 T20s, 2 tests. I'm saying 2-1 to West Indies in the ODIs, 3-0 to West Indies in the T20s. Santoki, you can't believe what I'm doing here. 2-0 to West Indies in the Test.
Damn.
Santoki, you're next.
I'll go 3-0 with the ODIs. I'll go 3-0 with the ODIs. I think the T20s 2-1 to West Indies, just because it's a short enough format and Sri Lanka are good enough to kind of pick up a win. I think that'll be the closest series. You know what, Mash? The Test series, I don't know, man. I don't know if I've been drinking today, but I'm going to have to join you with a 2-0 West Indies. This could massively backfire on us. But I will tell you, based on Sri Lanka's batting performances, particularly in the first innings against England and the second innings of the second Test, and West Indies' form, I can imagine both tests ending within about 2 days. So, but I do think West Indies will win 2-0.
And Andrew, this isn't biased. We are never ever this confident.
No. I fully. Your confidence is fully well placed. Let me say that I do not begrudge any of these like predictions. I think they, in another life where I was allowed to like kind of like be less kind of focused on Sri Lankan cricket, I probably would make these same predictions. So should I run in with my predictions now?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I will say definitely West Indies will win the T20 series. I think I don't know, it'll be 3-0, but I'm pretty certain they'll win. I'm going to be kind of ambiguous. ODIs, I think again West Indies probably have. Just because Sri Lanka haven't played in so long, I think West Indies have the edge. Let's say 2-1 to West Indies on that. In tests, you know what? Weirdly, despite the fact that Sri Lanka have lost their last 4 tests, they're getting a few players back in these ones. And given what happened on the last West Indies series, I'm going to say 1-1. I'm going to say 1-1 for this.
Yeah.
That's why I paused, because I was like, will it be 1-1? Yeah. The last time Sri Lanka came in 2018, it was 1-1, and actually Sri Lanka probably should have won that one 2-1. Yeah, I'm changing it, Santoki. 1-1 in the Test.
No, you can't. Come on, you can't leave me hanging like this.
Yeah, I'm going to say 1-1, and then say the ODIs are a little bit more up for grabs. The T20s, I think West Indies definitely, but the ODIs are going to be a little bit more competitive. And the ODIs and Tests, I think those are 2 series I'm really looking forward to watching. I think I think we can possibly all agree that these are like 2 very, very teams in turmoil, teams that have had to put up with very, very similar like messed up things in their administration over the last few years. And this is a series that, despite the fact that I'm going to wake up at like 3:30 a.m. or 3 a.m. for some of these matches to watch them, I'm super excited about seeing a lot of this cricket. It's going to be super fun.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Most definitely. So, ladies and gents, that's been episode 37. That's been our look into the West Indies Sri Lanka series. By the time this drops, West Indies may actually have announced their ODI and T20 squad. We don't think the Test squad will be announced for a while yet. But obviously, we've had Andrew on. He's been an amazing guest. I was about to say, make sure you follow Andrew, but like 60,000 of you already do. So make sure you follow us. But no, Andrew's been a fantastic guest. Thank you, Andrew, for coming on. It's been an amazing insight, particularly for fans of the West Indies who want to know about what Sri Lanka can offer ahead of this particular series. Stay locked in, everyone, on the Twitter handles, etc. Andrew will be writing throughout the tour, no doubt. So make sure you look at his pieces, etc. But we've been the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. That's been episode 37. Thank you and good night.